All right, back with Brett C. Banfe. This is Gavin. We're gonna talk a little bit about about what's going on in the market. People keep telling me BTC it's gonna be going up forever. It's never gonna stop going up. So I don't know. I looked at the price, Brett. What is happening with Bitcoin and the original Bitcoin and BTC and the Ponzi scheme over there that they got going on? So how you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, we were talking right before the show started about that tweet from influencer Jacob King. Gavin, we mentioned I'd love to see Jacob on your show. Maybe we can, if you're a fan of the show, tag Jacob in the comments. We can maybe get him interviewed by Gavin. But I think what he was saying was something along the lines of, that the normies were clamoring for ETFs of Bitcoin, BTC so that they could, chase the price up, etc. But what, his latest tweet was indicating that most of the money that moved in through these ETFs, it was actually just we can money from people that are just chasing a spike in price. And the volatility that that introduces as new potential assets. I think an Ethereum ETF was the subject of his most recent tweet. As people decide to move, try to chase these lukewarm profits, what you're seeing is volatility, hundreds of millions of dollars moving in and out of these markets, etc. A far cry from the original vision that Bitcoin was described and designed for, which is peer-to-peer electronic cash.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems like a really high risk thing right now. I mean, these people are really just I look at the price. There was a pricing chart, and it's like it goes like this. Shoo. Like if you bought it down here, great, but it's like at this super high peak, and assuming that that's gonna, if you listen to Michael Saylor and Jack Dorsey, they say it will go up forever like that. That's, but let's come on, dude. No sane person can believe that.
Yeah, and we also hear it from Kurt Wooker Jr., who talks about this a lot. And the amount of money that would take to move into the BTC network in order to 10x your gains at this point is, an astronomical sum of money. So in part they're sort of playing off of the meteoric rise that Bitcoin has had since its inception, but a lot of that has come before the takeover. And another trending topic in this week's news that touches on this very subject is Luke Dash Jr. talking about the threat that the knots node implementation represents, that he described it as a bigger threat than the block size wars back in 2015 and 2016 that led to the split of BCH. And I think he effectively, and this is Luke Dash Jr., one of the core contributors, monitors the Bitcoin improvement, the BIP resource. And he described it as BTC as a failed project effectively at this point. He said that 85% of the economic activity needs to be coming from home nodes effectively. And we've long since disproven this in the big block world. So we don't have to rehash exactly why that's incorrect. But what it represents to me is a view that commercialization and capitalism is the real boogeyman here, and that as long as we can all run home nodes, and then we can effectively stave off the capitalist boogeyman from taking over the network, because once we have big blocks, then effectively we have a degree of scale for the network in which the average person just running their node on a Raspberry Pi or their laptop is no longer able to keep up. Well, that's exactly what the purpose of capitalism is, right? We don't all build our vehicles. We find the specialists like Ford, Chevrolet, Tesla, Toyota. We find the specialists, and then we consolidate the resources so that we can, distribute the benefits to the widest possible audience. And that's the exact same thing that we would be seeing in the blockchain world if the big blockers had won that block size war. But he's effectively raising the white flag at this point, and the one of the key contributors of BTC is raising the white flag and saying that BTC is failed at this point.
That is so big. I mean, to think that the champion of BTC, the cat man himself, is now saying that he wants that BTC is failing. Right. I mean, it's just yeah. I mean, I see that, man. It's something that we've already seen coming. So if you're watching this video, hopefully you have you're getting the insight way earlier than everybody else, because you're not going to hear this in the mainstream. They're not going to tell you this in the mainstream. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, and imagine if we had taken this same position with the rise of the internet itself, saying, "Oh, well, we can't have, large service providers of internet. We can't have fiber optic cables, et cetera, because effectively what we really need to have is every single user of the internet needs to be checking and validating all information that's being passed on the internet." I mean, it's ridiculous, right? There's a reason why we have the concept of service providers and, service users. And so what we're seeing, the people who are tuned into your channel, Gavin, are ahead of the curve on some of this knowledge because, and it's one of those things where sometimes when you look back at the dot-com bubble or some previous bubbles and you think like, how could they have been so misguided? How could they have not seen the writing on the wall, that of course, just because it's dogfood.com doesn't make it $100 million business. That at the end of the day, you need more than a web domain to actually have a real successful business, right? You need more than just, hawk to a coin or something like that to have a successful blockchain project. And but yet we're seeing it time and again, that we're so, as human species, we're so instinctive. Like we have this lizard brain mentality that goes back, millions of years to, our eukaryote, biology, uprising, and we just can't shed it. We think that there's a possible gain to be made, and we're willing to risk everything to achieve that, and this gets used against us, right? And we're seeing that with the takeover of BTC, with Blockstream narrative. And it's also why they spend so much time social engineering these narratives that you have to adopt the laser eyes, and you can't think for yourself. You need to just get in line like the sheep, and get driven over the edge, because what's good for us all is good for everyone. And what you see in BSV and big block Bitcoin, you see the opposite of that. You see people who really challenge each other. Even within our own community, we saw another trending topic this week, which was the Galaxy node code audit and things like this. But you see the hallmarks of people that are thinking for themselves. They're not just being blindly led by a really great story. They are actually capable of doing the difficult critical thinking to analyze, even if they're not a coder or even if they're not a node operator. They have the ability to look out into the future and see, okay, let's take these primitives as truths, and let's see what does that mean down the road. And that's why we've chosen big block Bitcoin.
Yeah, that is. I definitely want to hear more about the news. Before we get to that, Brett, I wanted to ask you about the paper that the White House had published before Bo Hines had left. He published the one of the papers, and it talked about the airdrop. It really, I think it's going into the new the Clarity Act, and I think it's going into the Clarity Act and the Genesis Act. And it's going into the how these how airdrop tokens work and airdrop protocols work. And reading that, I mean, I'm reading it. The way it spoke to me in reading it was exactly what happened with BTC.
Hmm.
Uh, and it was the first time I'd ever had it clarified to me that way. And I'm just wondering if I was the only one that caught that, or if if I was onto something. Like, was it actually an airdrop token, like with BTC, that what had happened? Because I mean, the whole narrative is, oh, it forked, but we know now that there really wasn't. I don't think there was actually no fork. I don't know, and so it's what actually happened.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good question. So, to get into this, what we're talking about is that report that was issued by the White House, and I believe it will go into the Clarity Act, just like you said. The report referenced, I think are you talking about the one where it referenced the CoinGeek article?
Yeah, I
That
referenced the
the one?
CoinGeek article as well.
Yep.
And then it described airdrop tokens, and
Mhm.
talked about how protocols can do airdrop tokens for people to incentivize them, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and so there's a few points that should be made really clear here for our listeners. So one of those points is the concept of pre-mining a blockchain or pre-mining the tokens. So Bitcoin famously was not pre-mined and is provably not pre-mined. But this is one of the ways in which some of these competing tokens, they always end up with like hundreds of millions of dollars, and you're thinking like, well, where did this hundreds of millions of dollars come from? And a lot of times, in Ethereum is an example of it. But a lot of times Cardano, et cetera, what they're able to do is they're able to carve out pre-mined tokens before they become available to the public. And then they use those tokens to refund development into their infrastructure and their ecosystem. And the problem with that is just the exact same problem that we're seeing in the current fiat economy, which is that when the government is able to just print as much money as they want, in a way that's kind of like the ability to pre-mine the dollar, right? And then what they're doing is then reintroducing those pre-mined dollars back into the economy through the Fed window and through some of these other mechanisms that they have. Of course, the people who are closest to these entrenched circles of power are the ones who receive the funds first, and then it supposedly ripples out to the wider network, and eventually you get your $1,200 check, your stimulus check or something like that. Whereas by this point the carcass has already been picked clean on the funds that got shoveled through the discount window. And effectively what that does is it just reduces the purchase power of the rest of the network. And so this is one of the things famously Bitcoin does not have. Its tokens were not pre-mined, and one of the ways that is provable is that the original Bitcoin client had, if we're probably all familiar with that quote from the January 5th London Times, I believe, where they said something like the chancellor's on the brink of a second bailout of the banks. So that had a twofold purpose. Number one, it did set some precedent that this is one of the reasons why Bitcoin exists in the first place, is that when we come to rely on a medium of exchange with each other that can constantly be debased by the centralized powers that be, like the federal governments or the global authorities, then we're at their mercy, we're at their whim, and the only thing we can do is just sort of grab on, hold as tight as we can, and try not to get bucked off the Bronco. Unfortunately, we're seeing more and more people fall and have the inability to have any savings whatsoever. And by the time you even maybe you inherit some savings that your grandfather left you or something like that. But by the time the dollar has lost all its value, it's no longer even savings. Maybe you go out with it and you buy a loaf of bread and a gallon of milk
Hmm.
with what your grandfather worked his whole life to save you. So that's one of the key value propositions of Bitcoin, is that it doesn't have that pre-mined component to it. And the other side of that is, okay, so it doesn't have the pre-mined component of it, but what it does, what it could potentially have is this airdropped component of it. So let's examine what that means, this airdrop component of it. And we use a quick metaphor for that, which is going down the street from me. There's a reptile, business that sells snakes. So imagine I go into this reptile, shop and I buy a snake, and and we all know that snakes shed their skin. So imagine now I take the snake home and I wait until it sheds its skin, and then I go onto Facebook Marketplace and I say, "Who wants to buy a snake?" And then I sell someone the snake, the skin that my snake has shed. Okay, but I claim it's a snake. So this is what happens. So Bitcoin itself, you can argue that BTC is like the shed skin of Bitcoin because, some people decided at some point that this was going to be the new way that Bitcoin gets treated. And instead of Bitcoin being a chain of digital signatures like it is defined in the white paper, it's going to be this new, unique network. It's going to carry the same name, just like I still call it a snake, even though it's just the skin, but what we all know, just like a snake has unique properties, right? It can slither, it can move around, it has a tongue that it can flicker in and out. The skin that I'm calling a snake, it doesn't exhibit any of these qualities. Just like Bitcoin has unique qualities, right? It can be sent peer to peer. It can be a provable chain of digital signatures. It can, be sent for very low fees. There is no intermediary, so users don't need to send a transaction to the node network. Me can hand you a transaction peer to peer, and then Alice to Bob, and then Bob's responsibility as the merchant, he sends that payment to the node network in order to determine, is this a valid payment, right? Some of those components that have been true and key about Bitcoin since its inception, those are no longer attributes of the BTC system. So yes, you could describe that model where the network forks itself off. It picks new rules. It decides up is down, down is up. It thinks black is white, white is black, and it wants to play its own game in its own little corner. But if we go back to the original document, the Bitcoin white paper, that's what we always need to go back to when we're referencing Bitcoin. And what we see is that Satoshi described this specific situation completely. He said that no amount of hash power can ever force an honest node to accept dishonest blocks, or invalid blocks is a better way I believe he actually used. So what that means is that, certain people decide that they want to introduce all these new rules. Up is down, down is up. These new opcodes, SegWit, they want to break the chain of digital signatures, and they're going to have a new way of validating payments, et cetera, that's not including that transaction signatory history with the transaction itself, like Bitcoin describes and defines in the white paper. And they're gonna fork off just like a snake sheds its skin, and then they're gonna have a little dice game where everyone sits around it and they are all gambling on the snake skin that they pulled off of the original, and it really has nothing to do with the actual original itself, right? It has, just because people are huddled around gambling on this snake skin, it doesn't have anything to do with the original device from which that skin actually came. That is the original vision of Bitcoin, that was peer-to-peer electronic cash, and it's just going to continue to go along its own way. And, we had that story when we were all children. You may remember the hungry caterpillar, if you remember, just like the hungry caterpillar, its goal was, it starts off eating little berry and then it eats some leaves. And every time it gets a little bigger, right? Well, that's what Bitcoin is. The original vision of Bitcoin is the hungry caterpillar. And it's just inching along, and it's going slower, than maybe people would like, etc. But its appetite is immense. And the reason why its appetite is immense is because what it's providing is data integrity, auditability, transparency, security, peer-to-peer payments, infrastructure for a completely revamped digital age, moving away from centralized models to this distributed model, embracing of capitalism, embracing of micropayments. What that provides is market efficiencies. And what we all know, that the market is hungry for better ways to be secure, to secure its own data, to transmit data, to share data, to log and immutably record data, all of these things. So that is why the caterpillar will eventually eat the entire global economy. And that is why BSV will win in the end.
Yeah, I mean it's super exciting, when you start to really break it down and think about it, because I mean there is a very there, you got a glass half empty attitude. It's like, man, things are really bad out there, and you could be like, the fiat market could go away. I mean, it's really scary, a lot of things. That's like the attitude. But then I keep thinking, I'm like, but wait a second. I have the knowledge about the original Bitcoin. Most people don't have that knowledge. They don't know about it. They may hear of BTC, but then they're in another trap. It's like you're back in the trap again. It's great because you got this. I mean, it's sad. It's great for them, but it's sad because you've got this revolutionary concept. They're calling Bitcoin, and they're passing it off as though it's this incredible revolutionary breakthrough technology, which it actually is just a name that's revolutionary in the protocol. But that thing they have over there is not it. And so it's like just this. I mean, it's exciting because we know, but we got to get more people to know about it, because it's like, not because I mean, I feel like, called to let as many people know, like, dude, no, there's original protocol is there, and it is the way out of this entire mess that we're in. Having the truth leather, having transparency, the time chain to log all the signatures, the scalable network, right? That's going to be putting all the data on chain, and it's only just a matter of time before we get the AIs and the large language models. They are now start competing in Satoshis, and then taking Satoshis as payments. It's not too long, Brett, till that happens. I mean, they move so fast. I mean, it could be 30 days for all I know. I mean, literally, they move so fast, the way that programming happens. And I guess that's another thing I really want to kind of segfold into that's super important is, like, I'm learning now about BRC 100. Well, I'm learning that it exists, and kind of like scratching the surface on what it means and the importance of it with Mitch. And so, like, I guess the point that Mitch made last week to me was on the show was that, look, all these businesses and the AIs, they want Bitcoin. They just don't speak it. They don't know how to speak Bitcoin. And apparently that's what the MetaNet client and BRC 100 is. So where do we
Yeah.
go from here?
Yeah, exactly. And what you're seeing, and we're already seeing this, again, to use another metaphor, it's as though we're in the dawn of the age of electricity. And there's still a lot of moneyed interest in candle making, so they've learned how to make candles real, real well, and they have a big monopoly on the candle market. And so, the candle makers don't want electricity. That's how they lose their edge. So, what we're seeing that right now. We're seeing, and one of the ways in which we're seeing the rise of this need for BSV is through the AI, like you're describing, is through these protocols that are allowing distributed systems to talk to each other. Because what you're able to do creatively that no other system is able to do is, we're seeing the rise of this concept of micropayments, right? Like right now, I think there's another trending story in the news that is saying that effectively, there have been two main ways to deal with AI bots if you are a website creator or something like that. Like imagine you're Reddit or you're some sort of major platform or something, and so you're creating a lot of content daily, and of course there is that content can either be open to the AI, to the bots to scrape, etc., or it can be closed. There's really no medium, there's no in the middle there. But what we're seeing is the rise of, effectively the demand for micropayments, as what you have is more a pay as you scrape or pay as you crawl. This is something that we never had the infrastructure to support back when we were crawling things like with Google and, things like that, right? So what you had to have was you had to have the formation of a monolithic entity that scraped and crawled everything for free and provided it for free to the users. But of course, that has a massive, bill that's attached to it. So how do you actually foot the bill that it takes to run the amount of server space that it takes to provide all these websites, et cetera? And that is why suddenly it became encroaching on users' data, the encroaching on users' privacy, because now suddenly the way that they were monetizing that service that free service that they were providing when they say, when the service is free, you are the product, right? The way that they were doing that was by scraping your data and then selling it down the street. So you were getting, but that was kept a little hidden from you, just like in The Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain. You don't have to worry about what's going on back there. You're getting your Google search for free. Of course, now the top 20 results of that Google search, they're all paid for, right? They're not actually the best results for what you're looking for as a consumer. They're the ones who are willing to, to pay to get in front of your eyes as quickly as possible. And, so what we're seeing with the rise of BRC 100, with the rise of BSV, the demand for these data services, et cetera, is and especially with the rise for the AI pay as you scrape, pay as you crawl system, is that we're seeing finally a dawning on these the people who are involved with the architecture and the infrastructure of the internet, that maybe micropayments are the next innovation that is going to fund the development of the entire next 20, 30 years of the internet, just in the same way that the internet itself reached that peak somewhere in the late 80s, et cetera, and now reached this point to where we actually have an upgraded architecture for that system, where we can exchange data peer to peer, where it can remain encrypted end to end, without it being, spied on by an NSA or a three-letter agency, et cetera. And so, but the problem is that, okay, so we're willing to work out this micropayment system, but who is going to be the arbiter of those micropayments? Are we going to use fiat? If we are going to use fiat, are we going to use the US dollar? Suddenly, if we're using the US dollar, now we have certain countries that we're not willing to crawl or accept payments from, right? Because, now all of a sudden you have the geopolitics of the world that creep their way into the free dissemination of information. And that shouldn't really happen, right? That we're all better as humankind, the more access that we have to free and open information. And this was one of the problems that we saw over the past 5 years or so, as more and more there became political incentive to shut certain stories down, the Hunter Biden story, et cetera. These stories that that have value to humankind, as we can actually make our own decisions for us, or the COVID vaccine stories, et cetera. We can actually openly evaluate this stuff. But what was happening was saying, oh, we'll do your thinking for you, Gavin. Don't you worry about that. We've already thought about this question for you, and we decided you're going to have ham and eggs today, and you're going to, you're going to go to the 24/7 fitness. You don't worry about that other one. You're going to go to the ones that we decided are right for you, et cetera. And what you see is the erosion and the destruction of the liberties. And so who maintains this infrastructure for this microsystem payment model? Is it going to be a centralized agency? Is it going to be something like, a free trade organization out there or something? Is it going to be the IMF? Is it going to be, the United States? There's no real good answer for that. This is where the demand for BSV as a distributed data and Bitcoin, the word bit and coin, a data monetization system, comes into play, because it is not run through any single power. It's not a centralized system. It's an open public network. The rules are understood by all. Anyone can participate with it. It's not a proof of stake system, so you don't need to be Peter Thiel to be able to, write blocks to the network or anything like that. All you need to do, just like in our grandfather's time, is you need to pull your bootstraps up and you need to put yourself put the work in to provide a service and a value to the global economy. And so this is the thing, this is the key innovation that's going to change everything. And we're right on the precipice of it as Terranode is getting ready to launch, because we're actually going to see this data system, this monetized data commodity network, as I know you're a big fan of that concept that Satoshi describes a lot about what actually makes it a commodity and why that's important, because it allows for the cross-border payments, right? Whereas a currency, like if I want to send Great British Pounds or something like that, to New Zealand or something like this, now we're starting to get into, there's that's money transmitting that, effectively is securitization and the transmission of securities, et cetera. None of that is, there's so much legal red tape to jump through for that. Whereas when you're talking about data transmission, a commoditized piece of data that has strict guidelines that define what it is, that it's not centralized, that it's not owned by any one party or entity or individual or anything like that. Now you can actually see it be a global payments network, and that is exactly what we're going to see here in the next 2 to 3 years.
Well, now you bring that up. That's exactly what the Clarity Act defines, and it hasn't passed yet. It's in the House, and they've got great legislation. It's gonna, it's in the works. But in that Clarity Act, it talks about defining a mature blockchain, and rather exciting because when I read through the mature blockchain section of the Clarity Act, I mean, it's clear to me, it's clear as day that there's no possible way that Ethereum or BTC or these other pre-mined networks that were just pre-mined, that all these people took millions and billions of dollars in and then started it and then dumped it on everybody. Those are not mature blockchains. They cannot be. So those can still be legal entities. It's not like those people have done bad. And I'm not saying they're wrong. It's just they're going to be classified differently than the mature blockchains. That's all. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just they're different than the mature blockchains. And I don't know how many mature blockchains there will be. Maybe just, we'll see, maybe just one. But there's going to be a process. They're going to have to apply a process through Congress, saying here, through the process. That's what they're setting the framework on, to say, all right, we're a mature blockchain. Here's our documentation and information to prove it.
Yeah, and to answer your question with, another question is, what was Satoshi's thoughts about that very question? Satoshi was very clear that he thought that there would be one global chain, and that global chain needed to have clear, defined rule set that allows everyone to compete fairly, because the problem with a ever shifting set of rules is that it doesn't allow people to compete fairly, right? This is what you have with global political influence, is you have nepotism, you have what is true for me is not necessarily true for you. It's who and suddenly the rules can shift, etc. You can't have a global commoditized network, monetization network that has, that succumbs to the wills or the influence of various different political representatives or political power. So it must have a clear, a clear rule set that anyone can compete and participate with. And this is, if you think back to, like someone like Connor Murray or something like that, that was, doing a lot of work with the BSV Association on, on the network access rules and the the Digital Asset Recovery Act, et cetera. He would talk about how the North Star for the Bitcoin protocol is really, will a transaction that was created in 2009, will it still be valid in 2039? Will it be valid in 2169? Whatever. And if suddenly you have the ability, and this is why people like Luke Dash Jr., waving the white flag and saying that BTC is a failed project, it causes us to chuckle, because this is what they couldn't see from the beginning. This is the unique advantage that we have as being smarter than them, is that we can see that we a transaction that is valid in Bitcoin's original days, it needs to be able to be valid in 500 years from now. And if you're talking about anything else, then if you're Luke Dash Jr., then you're just sniffing your own farts, and you're not going to create global disruption.
Yeah, I mean, without a chain, in very basic terms, all right, simple terms. So Bitcoin is defined as the chain of digital signatures. All right, so if I'm going to track if I need a receipt for my transaction, I need that chain of digital signatures so I can show where it came from and who it went to. Hey, and then I can go to a court and say, look, I sent that Bitcoin to Brett, and then Brett sent it over here. There's a chain of these signatures. And then we can show to the judge, and the judge is going to say, "Yep, that was yours. Give it back to him." You know.
Exactly.
Now,
And
yeah,
that the ability to prove the that to retain that signature information is really important because identity is firewalled from the blockchain, but it's not absent. Right. So if we understand through circumstantial evidence who controlled those keys, it's like, if you're seen on video camera at the scene of a crime or something like that, right? It's still circumstantial evidence. Maybe multiple witnesses saw you. Maybe we have some descriptions of you, etc. But when you add these multiple pieces together, you can form a logical, rational conclusion. And when you strip out the signature information from that, I mean, we both are big fans of, Liz Crokin and her Pizzagate investigations, etc. And imagine now that all of that information about who was purchasing what, and we no longer see the signature of that data. So now what you have is you're effectively blurring the part that could criminally implicate if those digital funds are being used for illicit purposes, like human trafficking, et cetera, and things like this. So what you're seeing is, the systems that want to keep the block small, to keep everyone managing it, they also coincidentally they want the signatures to be blurred. So we're no longer able to make a provable declaration of these funds. We know that they were used for the purposes of human trafficking, but now the signature of who actually signed that payment, now that part's a little bit blurry. So we can't use that as admissible to clean some of this trafficking stuff up. And what we're seeing is that the opposite of that is true on a true open commoditized data network, that you don't obfuscate the digital signatures. The digital signatures are retained. However, they are firewalled in terms of the identity from the blockchain itself. What would be required to confirm identity is things like investigative police work, which is exactly how it works in the real world.
yeah. I mean, I would just think that, like, if we had a valid controversy, and so let's say that I'd sent you some BTC, and then I also sent you, let's say, BSV, and then we brought it to court because we had a dispute, and you're saying, no, this is mine. I'm saying, no, you took that from me, and you didn't have a right to give it back. And we go into court, and the court's looking at these things, saying, well, I see the chain of digital signatures here on this, and we bring in experts, right? Because the court can't. He can't see this, but we bring in the experts, the Xiaowei Lus of the world, that come and say, okay, I'm an expert. I'm going to show you what a chain of digital signatures means. And then you bring in your expert, Luke Dash Jr., and he says, we don't need those signatures anymore. And I say, well, wait a second here, and I got my signatures here. I want my Bitcoin back. And you're like, well, sorry, Luke said it doesn't need to be there. So it's, it is what it is. And the judge is going to laugh at you. He's going to say, sorry, I'm sorry. That one, you can't get that back because it's gone and there's no proof that it was ever yours. This expert came in and said, that's been split up. We can't prove it. We don't know if that was actually him. But over here, you're called, you have to give that back to him.
And we see this with there's historical precedents to some of what you're describing because contract law, the natural laws of man, like tort law, some of this stuff, common law, a lot of these laws, these were all developed before computers or electronics existed at all, right? But once computerization and digitalization existed, now you suddenly had the opportunity for, let's say that we made an electronic agreement, and I have signed that agreement, but I used an email to sign it, or I used a an electronic service like DocuSign to sign it. And suddenly I try to go to court and say like, hey, well, I didn't sign it with a pen and a paper, so this doesn't necessarily apply. These old laws about what constitutes a contract, et cetera, that doesn't apply. So we've had to go through and look at these types of things where we say, okay, well, now we have a new mechanism to administer the same law, and how do we actually apply that? So blockchain is just a new mechanism, but what happens when you have this completely brand new technology is you're always going to have some judges that maybe don't fully understand it. So they're not clear exactly what actually constitutes a signature, what constitutes identity, things like this. And so it takes time for these things to work their way to create precedent through the court system. But what you find is that it's second verse same as the first. You aren't gonna, just because you're developing a blockchain doesn't mean you're throwing out tens of thousands of years of contractual obligations and history, et cetera. You're just looking at a signature as being maybe a slightly different mechanism, instead of using a really elaborate cursive like we did back in the days of the Declaration of Independence. We're using a cryptographic algorithm, but a signature is a signature, and a rose by any other name smells just as sweet.
Yeah, I mean, I see a day off in the future that Coinbase will eventually have to remove the name Bitcoin off of the airdrop token, that meme coin, and that is going to be a day of vindication when they do, and they say, "Oh, you know what? We made a mistake. That actually wasn't Bitcoin, and we're really sorry about that. We've got to get that off of there." Everybody wants to
But
own that meme coin, Greg coin. Here it is.
But I want to just paint a picture for you. Okay, so imagine that suddenly the exact analogy of what you just described happened in the world of numismatics, of gold, of bullion. And suddenly people realize, you know what? We're no longer going to call gold gold. We're going to call gold copper. We made a mistake. We figured it out, and now we're going to call copper gold. Well, does that have anything to do with the value of either of them? No one is going to bat an eye. The only thing that it would do is create a little bit of confusion in the markets on maybe the first day that those names switched, as people are wondering. But all of a sudden, people realize, hey, why is this gold worth $3 a pound? I don't understand. Oh, they switched the name gold and copper. It doesn't have anything to do with the actual value of that commodity, and that's what we're going to see. That's not the case currently with BTC and BSV, because currently the one that actually is gold, the one that has all the utilities, the properties, that's malleable, that can be that can be hammered out into sheets that are a single atom thick, etc. All of the things that make gold so unique, that it's not corrosive, that it is able to transmit electric signals better than any other substance on the earth. It has nothing to do with the fact that it's called gold. And so what we're going to see is the great reckoning, when the reality of the situation, when it comes to which of these tokens, BSV versus BTC, is the real McCoy. And when that happens, then we're going to see that the only thing that was causing the BTC, the charlatan network, to be propped up to begin with, is its connections to all these back channels, to legacy financial institutions that we see now with the introduction of the BlackRock ETF and stuff. And so what you would see is the complete collapse of that market, because unlike you would see with gold, if suddenly the name of gold changed, the market would be the exact same size, and the interest and the appetite would be the exact same, because no one cares what it's called. What actually matters is what it does. And so the thing is that this is such a new technology that no one can tell the difference between the real McCoy BSV and the charlatan BTC, and that day is coming. Trust me.
Not only do they can't tell it, they don't even. I mean, according to Mitch the other day, he was breaking this down. Like, people don't even understand it at all. Not even the beginning of it, And I mean, that's really like a big step here, Brett. Like, that we gotta, me included, I need to understand this thing. I want to understand it, even if it's at just a surface level of understanding the coding, the computer science behind it. So like, What how do we do that? I know that Todd has education. Mitch may have education. Maybe Babbage has education. How do we learn this thing? How do we learn about it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think that we just use the examples um that have already worked for us in the past. A lot of times, and we talk about this on our spaces, a lot of times, that these things, these there's so many truisms, people say, well, you can talk the talk, but can you walk the walk? That's an age-old adage that, our grandmothers have taught us, right? So all this is taking the age-old adages of, put up or shut up. Instead of talking the talk, just walk the walk. Put your money where your mouth is, right? All of these things, all it is just it's these exact same truths that we understand intuitively, but it's just applied across a digital distributed network. And so, what this actually is, if we look back to the famous technologist George Gilder, he described this when the first telephones first were starting to come to market. He described it as a small world network, right? Because as the small world network, when you're the only one on the planet that has a telephone, the value of the telephone is very, very little. It's effectively zero, but as that network starts to grow, the value of the ability to interact and interface with that network expands. And suddenly now you can call your cousin in Utah, or you can call, your aunt in Vancouver, etc. And so all that the main thing that I think people really need to know and to understand is that this is the exact same thing. This is a small world network. So if you want to know, how do we interface with this new paradigm that we're developing and building? You do the exact same thing you've always been doing, except you just you exchange with each other, you trade using BSV, you accept BSV for payments. So if you want to do some, if you want to accept some tips, you can open a hand cash account and put in your video content, feel free to send me some tips at my hand cash handle right here, etc. And so then someone says, okay, well, I want to send Gavin a tip. I'll go through the steps in the process to do that. And suddenly what you realize is now you're interfacing, you're still doing the same things, right? It's still about building a small world network of people that watch each other's backs, that are cautious of scammers, that are cautious of charlatans like Luke Dash Jr., that are willing to call out BS, like, we saw recently with the Babbage audit review, and are just willing to back that up with their proof of work. And so what you'll find is that the natural system of the course takes its own paths, because you're starting to interact with more and more people that are doing the same thing. You're sharing information with more and more people that care about these same value systems as you. And what you find is that little by little you start to completely transform the world.
So, what about BRC 100? Can you talk about that, Brett? Or
Yeah, so BRC 100 is Bitcoin request for comment, and this is a model that goes back to some of these other open source projects, and Ethereum had famous examples of this as well. So this is a little bit more on the developer side, as far as the protocol itself. But what it is it is a standard for sharing and exchanging information, that is connected with Project Babbage, with the MetaNet desktop. And so it is called a BRC because it is a proposal. And just like anything, you need to start with a proposal. So Babbage is saying, here's how we propose to classify information at this level. Here's how we propose to classify information at that level. Here's how we propose to work with identity. And I really assure you that I've met a lot of people in the BSV space, a lot of brilliant people, but I can think of no team that is more qualified to put forth these types of proposals than the Babbage team. The other thing is that that just because they're proposing it doesn't mean that it is the de facto standard, right? But what you do is you work with other teams that are building projects that are looking to do the same data exchange, data information. One of the things that it can do is it could theoretically create interoperable standards. So, for example, if you imagine that, like where I shop for my groceries, I also earn fuel points, but those fuel points have to be used where I shop for my groceries. They have a gas station in front of the grocery store, and I can only use the fuel points for my groceries at the gas station that's attached to that grocery store. That's because it's run on a centralized system. But imagine using BRC 100, what we could actually do is we could unlock that data of how much I've been purchasing with my groceries. And now maybe I can use that. Maybe I get a bonus for using it at my home grocer's fuel station, but I can use it anywhere. Well, part of the problem with that is that you know, some of that might expose sensitive information about me, like in order to know how much I'm spending on food, maybe they can include information of what my zip code is, where I buy the most food. Now, suddenly, if I'm exchanging this with, information like BP oil or like Chevron, maybe some of those people that have access to that data, maybe they're in certain parts of the world where, I wouldn't necessarily want my data being shared. What the BRC 100 standard would enable and allow for people to do is to effectively, create a standard for the exchange and validation of information, while also allowing for the redacting of the sensitive information that is going to be exposed. So it's the same example of being able to verify that I'm the year 21, so I can purchase alcohol without necessarily handing my ID to the cashier. So now they can see where I live, and potentially that's a security threat in and of itself. So, the BRC 100 is basically, and a lot of the Project Babbage tool stack. Unfortunately, I'm not the most well versed on the entire scope of what it does, because of the fact that it is very much catered towards a developer, and I'm much more on the layman side when it comes to that. But it is these are primitives. So primitives would be not necessarily, the like imagine, the schematic for how to build a home. Okay, so some people want a sunroom, some people want a porch, right? So Babbage is not telling you whether you should have a porch on your home or a sunroom. They're giving you the screws, the nuts and the bolts, and so they're giving you the tools. You can build your home however you want. But they're creating a standard. So now, you have a nut that's built by one company and a screw that's built by a different company, but they interface with each other. They work with each other because they're built around the same set of primitives. And so the BRC 100s is a request for comment around the very base level of what those primitives look like.
Heck yeah, nice, Brett. Well, I'm tomorrow. I'm going to do a space with Dagan. We're going to go into cold storage and talk about some of the things about the wallets and how even paper wallets, bringing back the paper wallets and stuff like that. So you're invited to that. Hopefully you can join in on
Yeah, I'd love
X.
to.
So now I am looks like I'm going to be going to the London blockchain conference. That's coming up in a couple months. So I hear you're not able to go this year because of did you have a baby, or you have a new
Yes,
baby?
yes, yeah. I have a new baby, and yeah, right now it's not in the cards for me. We'll see as we get closer to the event. But I'd love to do a show with you when you're at the event, and maybe I can check in and see what's been going on, and what's all the shenanigans, who's hanging out late at night, going to the diner, and having a great time like we've been doing in the past.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to it. It should be a lot of fun. I mean, I'm definitely just connecting with people and getting really have an agenda going, but I want to go and just really get my finger on the pulse with everything that's going on, and get to shake hands with more people. That's the key. It's the best part,
Yeah,
of
yeah. I think we met in Dubai. Is that when we met?
we did. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
Dubai
and just
conference.
what a breath of fresh air you are, like when I first met you, I remember that you told me that you were had a little bit of a legal background, right? If I remember correctly, that you were doing some work with an agency
Oh,
and
I was working with a I was working for a
yeah.
law firm at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, and you were doing like PR with them, and you're just someone that you have many hats that you wear. You do all your personal fitness stuff as well. And really I think your message is about taking more ownership of your life, being less just a pinball that's being bounced around by whatever decision makers decide for you, right? And your message is always to me stuck out as how do we have to have the knowledge of our surroundings, right? We if to be self sovereign, to make our own decisions and our own choices and to live by them, we can't just go out there with our eyes shut and just hope and pray that everything works. We really need to take the time to assess the world around us. And so, I think a lot of your exploratory content is about how do we know that we're in a transformative time with this technology, but, instead of letting it dictate its terms to us, if we understand it, knowledge is power, we can start to use it to create a better, more free world.
That's what it's all about. Creating a creating a more free world, creating more freedom for all of us, all the people, having a way to track to keep our track of our history, through the as we go forward and with these large language models, the AIs, we've got to have a way to track our history. There's more and more history that I'm finding out more recently that actually happened that we didn't know about. And stuff that I thought had happened that never did happen. And the timelines were all wrong, and I'm like, wait a second, why are we being deceived with all this stuff? Why can't we just, have a record of what actually happened and when and who did what? Because otherwise it just erased you from history. This guy never existed.
Yeah, exactly. And, one of the ways to, they do this with torture victims. I think there's even like manuals, the CIA has manuals about how to disorient people and to convince them to do things that are against their best interest, right? Is like you can sleep deprive them, and you can do all these various different tactics to them. And one of those tactics is to completely erase their history, and then you become this detached person. In fact, before Joe Rogan even made it to where he's at right now as a preeminent podcaster in the world, he was on this show with, I think it was a radio show back at the time, and he was with Jim Brewer. And I think he describes his DMT experience. So if you have a second, if you're listening in the audience, pull that up on a YouTube. Joe Rogan describes, his first DMT experience with Jim Brewer, et cetera. But one of the things that he describes in that segment is he says, we're such social creatures, and part of why we're social is because our social capabilities, it allows us to retain that history that you're describing. One of the ways that they how they deal with criminals, the worst of the worst in jails, et cetera, is they put them in solitary confinement. And he said something like, think about how crazy that sounds, that they take you away from murderers and rapists as a punishment. That's how bad being detached from other people, from your shared narrative and stuff like that is. And so I agree, being able to immutably timestamp our history, we just forget, like looking back in history, they say that history is written by the winners, et cetera. Well, how many times has the true history of a species, of a civilization, been completely lost because of the fact that it was, a new person got in power and they didn't like that history anymore. We saw that with the Mayans, when their civilization was taken over. I think their, almost all of their history. There's one book that's remaining out of their entire, and they had an advanced iconography that they used to, to just like the Egyptians. It was a little bit more like hieroglyphic, etc. But that as history does get written by the victors, we see the dissolution of our past, and the more that we can preserve that past, the more that we can know what how not to repeat the mistakes that we've made in that era.
Right on, Brett. I'm gonna wrap it there. So let's do it again. Hopefully see you tomorrow. Everybody tune into the show tomorrow. We're gonna do on X. All right, Brett. Great to see you, my man. Thank you very
Good to
much.
see you too.
All right, see you at the top.